Morning everybody, how are y'all doing today? I'm doing great myself because we got a good one today, ladies and gentlemen. Because I'm sure you all know by now MBG, you know, one of the more infamous PlayStation fanboys. We talked about him not too long ago when he was coping over the PlayStation State of Play. But he is back once again, but this time surrounding the topic of Sony not trusting Microsoft and the reason why when it comes to the Call of Duty and the Activision deal. And on top of this, towards the end, we're going to be talking about now, I can't show what we're going to be talking about, not because it's like, you know, super graphic or anything, but because this dude ended up deleting these things. And basically what we'll be talking about at the end of the video is the whole controversy around, oh, there was a PlayStation 5 version of Starfield in development, but then Microsoft canceled it. Basically, the dude had a mental breakdown about that on stream, and then he made some really salty tweets, all of which have been deleted since, which again is why I can't show anything. You guys will just have to trust me, and I know Frit is making a video on this as well, so maybe he has the footage and screenshots, but I'm not sure. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. So yeah, without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into this and find out why Sony does not trust Microsoft.
But we are moving on to the final topic of the video, and this I think is pretty significant to highlight because, you know, we've been covering the Activision Blizzard situation for some time, and more recently, you know, the public to some degree has seemed to really turn on Sony because Sony's made it clear that they maybe want to block the deal, but they've also made it clear that they simply do not trust Microsoft. And a lot of people, you know, are just kind of getting frustrated, like, Sony, why don't you just sign this deal? Why are you making this such a problem? You know, all these other companies are signing a deal.
Yeah, and I think everybody who's saying that is pretty justified in doing so. Because let me put it to you this way, Sony has refused Microsoft's 10 additional year offer for so long that Microsoft is no longer talking about making a deal with them. Microsoft has come out and said they are no longer going to be making a deal with Sony, meaning that Sony may have just lost out on a potential 10 free years of Call of Duty, which is the thing they're trying so hard not to lose. In their own pettiness and spitefulness, they basically shot themselves in the foot. I can already see the memes coming out. You know the one where the guy's sitting in the chair and then there's the guy in front of the camera with a gun and then the guy shoots the guy in the chair? Yeah, I can imagine Sony is shooting the 10 additional years of COD and then saying, why would Microsoft do this? You know what? I might just have to put that in the thumbnail. You know what? Never mind. I just made it. But memes aside, seriously, Sony should have just taken the deal because they're not only screwing themselves, they're also screwing over their player base, who they claim to love and care about so much. Like, imagine not taking a deal that would benefit you and your player base and then getting mad at the opposing company who offered the deal when you reject it. There's a reason everybody has been against Sony in this situation.
So I came across this article from Metro, and it says Starfield exclusivity is why Sony doesn't trust Microsoft's promises. It says Sony's unwillingness to accept Microsoft's Call of Duty deal is partially due to the company's handling of the Bethesda acquisition. While Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard only needs approval from regulators and not Sony, the Xbox company has done everything it can to appease its rival, at least in public.
Yeah, it's because they want to look good for the CMA, who have basically been bowing down to Sony for a majority of this acquisition. And then, of course, you know, all Sony's documents got released about paying to keep games off Game Pass and all that stuff, and then that kind of changed a little bit. But yeah, of course, Microsoft is going to be nice to Sony. This is a huge acquisition, and if exclusivity is the main concern, of course, they're not going to want to make the stuff exclusive. They're going to offer non-exclusivity deals, which literally everybody, including Nvidia, has taken but Sony.
Despite pledges to keep Call of Duty and other Activision titles on PlayStation and even allow Call of Duty onto PlayStation Plus, Sony has unrelentingly refused to bite. As it turns out, a major reason for this is that Sony simply doesn't trust Microsoft to uphold its promises, citing its acquisition of Bethesda and its parent company ZeniMax Media as proof that it's gone back on its word before. The outcome of the Bethesda acquisition is something we've made a point to reiterate ourselves throughout our coverage of Microsoft's Activision buyout. Before the Bethesda deal was finalized, Microsoft commented on how it wasn't so much interested in making Bethesda games exclusive to Xbox, but more so first or best. Xbox boss Phil Spencer also said that multi-platform releases would be be handled on a, quote, case-by-case basis, end quote.
Okay, I'm sorry that was a bit of a longer clip, but I really needed to let that play out. My God. Microsoft has gone back on its promises. What promises have they gone back on? Certainly not the ones that Sony mentioned right there. Bethesda games are not Xbox exclusive, like Phil Spencer said after they acquired Bethesda. All Bethesda games that do not have contractual obligations to release on PlayStation will release only on platforms where Game Pass is present. Now, if Sony wanted to allow Game Pass to exist on their console, then Bethesda games could keep appearing there. If Nintendo allowed Game Pass on the Switch, then all Bethesda titles would go there. They would probably have to be via cloud streaming, because there's no way the Switch is running Starfield by itself. And as for the whole case-by-case basis thing, it's like I said earlier, any game with a contractual obligation to be on PlayStation will be on PlayStation. They are still supporting Elder Scrolls Online. They are still supporting Fallout 76. Including the PlayStation versions of those games. However, games that do not have contractual obligations, such as Starfield or Redfall, will only appear on platforms where Game Pass is present. And it's kind of ironic that Sony is using Starfield as their argument for why they don't trust Microsoft, because before Microsoft had acquired Bethesda, Sony was in talks with Bethesda to either make Starfield a timed exclusive or completely exclusive to PlayStation. But Xbox and Microsoft are the bad guys, right?
Suggesting that some, but not all of Bethesda games would continue to launch on other platforms. Yet, once everything was set in stone, Phil Spencer turned around and admitted that the deal was about, quote, delivering great exclusive games for you that ship on platforms where Game Pass exists, end quote. Both Redfall and Starfield have since only been given Xbox launch dates, and it's so far presumed the same will apply to the Elder Scrolls 6.
Yes, because again, if the Elder Scrolls 6 does not have a contractual obligation to appear on the PlayStation, then it will not appear on the PlayStation, unless PlayStation allows for Game Pass to exist on their platform. Which, yes, I understand you might not want to allow your competition subscription service on your own platform, but at least if Sony allowed Game Pass on PlayStation, they would still be allowed to sell Bethesda games. And hell, they would probably get a cut of Game Pass revenue as well. But no, they're acting like spoiled, entitled children. Either Microsoft doesn't get to buy the company at all, or if they are allowed to buy it, Sony will not accept a single deal from them, even though they claim to be trying to protect the PlayStation gamers.
Both Redfall and Starfield have since only been given Xbox launch dates. Bethesda's own Todd Howard said before the merger that it was, quote, hard to imagine, end quote, the Elder Scrolls 6 meeting the same fate. Just a year later, once the merger had been completed, Phil Spencer, when discussing Starfield's exclusivity, said that he, quote, sees the same for Elder Scrolls 6, end quote. Sony has obviously noticed this too, and in a statement to the Competition and Markets Authority, or the CMA, about the Activision buyout, explicitly references this as proof of Microsoft's willingness to not respect public promises. While not a violation of a behavioral commitment, Microsoft's conduct in relation to the ZeniMax acquisition provides additional evidence of why a behavioral commitment should be approached with caution, it says.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Sony would never go back on a promise they made, right? No, they would never do that. And for anybody saying, oh, they went back on it, though, yeah, they only went back on it because they were about to get sued. If no lawsuit was gonna happen, they would have just made you pay for the Horizon upgrade. But also, I'd just like to point out, nowhere in any of Microsoft's statements, whether it's the one where games will be first or better on Xbox, or the one that says that Bethesda games will appear on platforms where Game Pass is present, at no point did Microsoft ever say the games would be coming to PlayStation still. They said the games with contractual obligations would still come to PlayStation. First on Xbox does not mean they will come to PlayStation later. They have not broken any promises. So this whole argument that Sony's making is complete BS.
It goes on to highlight how Microsoft told the European Commission ahead of the acquisition's approval that it would not have the incentive or cease or limit making ZeniMax games available for purchase on rival consoles, and told investors we highly encourage cross-platform play because if it's good for the gaming ecosystem, it's good for us. We don't have intentions of just pulling all of Bethesda content out of a competitor's platforms. This is likely why Microsoft has been so eager to stress that its 10-year deal to put Call of Duty on Nintendo's platforms is legally binding. Should Sony agree to the same offer, then Microsoft literally can't back out without inviting a lawsuit.
Which, yeah, that's another point. The original promises that Microsoft made about Bethesda and like the first or better stuff, that was not legally binding. This deal that they would be making with PlayStation is legally binding. So why would Sony not trust them? Do you think Microsoft is stupid enough to make a legally binding deal and then try to back out of it and get involved in a lawsuit over a company that's already been ridiculously difficult for them to purchase as it is? Look, companies may be evil, but they're not stupid. It's kind of hilarious though that this honestly makes Sony look even worse because they were crying about, oh, Microsoft hasn't upheld their promises in the past, yet those promises were not legally binding and this one is. So I really don't know what the problem is.
So I thought it would be worthwhile to cover this because, as I said, Sony has kind of been, you know, not looking too good out there, and it is interesting how quickly people forget, including myself, that, yeah, Microsoft did go from talking about Bethesda like, oh, yeah, you know, future Bethesda titles are just going to be first and best. That's really what we're thinking about. And, you know, case-by-case basis, to as soon as it went through, it's like, yeah, these games are going to be exclusive to Xbox and, you know, Game Pass. And it just, you know, wasn't even a question at that point.
But see, that's just not true. And this is one of the biggest reasons why people celebrate when Microsoft acquires companies. Because whenever Microsoft acquires a company, the games always go to Game Pass day one, and they don't make them exclusive to only Xbox. You can also get them on PC, on the Steam Deck, through the Samsung TV Xbox app, and through cloud streaming on mobile phones. Guess where you can play PlayStation first-party games? On a PS5, maybe a PS4 if they're gonna develop for that, and that's it. And then PC like a year or two later. These games are not only on Xbox, they're on PC and cloud streaming as well. Microsoft did not break any promises. But if you want to sit here and pretend that they did, then go right ahead.
To me, it's pretty obvious that, like, yeah, that was intentionally done to mislead people, at least in my opinion. And, you know, it's also telling when you see Todd Howard saying, yeah, it would be hard to imagine the Elder Scrolls 6 being exclusive to Xbox. And then, you know, Phil Spencer's like, oh yeah, we made Starfield exclusive, and I see the same thing happening for the Elder Scrolls 6 eventually. So
yes, because at the time they weren't sure about what exactly they were going to do. They weren't sure how they were going to handle exclusivity. But then after Microsoft acquired Bethesda, they figured out, hey, what we're gonna do is any platform that has Game Pass, we will release the games on. But if the game does not have a contractual obligation to appear on your platform and you do not have Game Pass on your platform, then you're out of luck. I mean, it's like you fanboys say, if you want to play a PlayStation exclusive, go get a PlayStation. Well, now if you want to play a Bethesda game, go get an Xbox, or a PC, or a Steam Deck, or a Samsung Smart TV, or cloud stream it to your phone. At least with Xbox, you have more than 2 platforms maximum that you can play your games on.
I think it's totally reasonable that Sony doesn't trust Microsoft. And I understand that a lot of people maybe think Sony's being ridiculous here because Microsoft is giving them a legally binding 10-year contract. So yeah, it's like, hey, we're letting you know, at least for 10 years, we're not taking Call of Duty off. So I understand why some people think it's a little bit ridiculous that Sony would still be, you know, like, I don't know, I don't trust you, but
I love how he says that people are pointing out, like, hey, this is legally binding. Microsoft literally cannot get out of this without a lawsuit. Sony would be idiots to not take this, and then immediately says, but, like, no, there are no buts here. Sony is acting like a spoiled child, saying, no, he can't have it, he can't have it, and then when he gets it, it's, no, I don't want anything from you. Which, again, I said it earlier, I'll say it again, is bad for both them and their players. It's so ironic that at the beginning of the whole controversy and, like, the CMA issues and stuff, you had Sony saying, oh, Xbox was gonna hurt the PlayStation gamers by taking the games away. Now Sony is hurting the PlayStation gamers by not taking Microsoft's very generous deal. But let's get into this dude's rebuttal to why this isn't good enough, I guess.
Again, like, we do have to think about the long term. Sony's likely thinking about the 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th year beyond that contract. And in Sony's eyes, it's pretty clear what Microsoft intends to do. And that is they will eventually, when they are no longer legally bound to release Call of Duty on the PlayStation, take it away from PlayStation.
Unless, you know, maybe PlayStation allowed Game Pass on their platform and then they could keep it. But no, that would be way too easy. But this argument just does not make any sense. Oh, Sony doesn't care about the next 10 years. They care about the 11th, 12th, and 13th. Would you rather have a game for 10 more years and have that amount of time to figure out how you're going to come up with competition for it? Or would you rather not have the game for an additional 10 years and then only have, like, what, 3 to 5 more years to come up with competition for it and miss out on all the additional sales you could get from microtransactions and just game sales by themselves? This argument doesn't make any sense. Ultimately, this dude's argument could be boiled down to, yeah, Sony doesn't want to take this because then they would get additional time to create competition for it and have extra time to figure out what their long-term plan is. Just doesn't make any sense.
So, yeah, I figured we would just cover this because, you know, a lot of people are maybe wondering why Sony is so distrusting of Microsoft, and this is why. It's basically because of the way they handled Bethesda, and even though Microsoft is doing everything they can to try to convince Sony that, you know, their ultimate intention at the end of the day, even if it's many years from now, is not to take Call of Duty away, Sony is pretty certain that that's exactly what Microsoft wants to do. And so they're not just going to, you know, simply say, okay, we'll sign the deal and we'll comply, even though we know exactly what's going to happen when that 10 years is up. So,
well, here's the problem with that, my guy. They're losing this game either way. Whether it's in 5 years or 15 years, they will be losing Call of Duty one way or another. Unless, again, they allow Game Pass to exist on PlayStation, which they won't. So basically, their options right now are to either sign the contract, get the additional 10 years, and have that extra time to come up with competition or come up with a game plan for the long term, or not sign the contract and not get it for an extra 10 years and have even less time to come up with competition and a plan for the long term. They basically chose the greater of two evils. And why? Because no, I don't want to make a deal. But anyway, guys, that was the end of that video. And really quick, like I mentioned in the intro, we're going to go over what happened after this real quick. So basically, for those of you who don't know, it came out that there was a PS5 version of Redfall in development, but then Microsoft canceled that after they acquired Bethesda because the game did not have a contractual obligation to come to PlayStation, and so they're not going to release it there. Well, MBG here got extremely salty about this, and he basically made a tweet. I can't remember what the exact words were, but it was something along the lines of, "Today I learned that it's okay for Microsoft to make games exclusive but not PlayStation," which is completely idiotic because, my guy, they own Bethesda. It is their IP. Redfall belongs to them. That makes sense. The problem people have with PlayStation is when they take these third-party games from Square Enix like Final Fantasy and pay them to not release games for Xbox and PC when they don't even own them. Now, if Sony acquires Square Enix and then wants to make it exclusive, then that's not really a problem. I still do think the game should come to PC day and date, but not releasing it on Xbox, you know, that's understandable. But paying off third-party companies that you don't own to block games from coming to other platforms, that's just incredibly scummy. But then it doesn't quite end there, because after he made that tweet, this dude proceeded to go on a live stream ranting about this and having an absolute mental breakdown. Now, again, I don't have any clips because the live stream is now deleted, but I'm sure Frit will have some clips in his video, which I am very excited for that video to come out. But yeah, anyway, guys, with that all being said, thank you all so much for watching. Like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you didn't like it, subscribe if you want to see more, and I will catch you all next time.